The World Trade Organization report has finally been released. Now that we've seen it, what does it mean for Newcastle United and the takeover? At 3 o'clock today, the long-awaited World Trade Organization report into the issues around Saudi piracy finally dropped into the public domain. But what does it say? And if you're a Newcastle United supporter like me, is this report enough to leave us stuck with Mike Ashley for a while longer? Before we go any further, please consider subscribing to this channel and like the video if you enjoy it. So just to briefly recap what is going on in the wider story here, Qatari state-run channel beIN Sports holds the right to Premier League football in the Middle East and North Africa region. Due to the two countries' breakdown in trading relations back in 2017, beIN Sports is banned from being broadcast in Saudi Arabia. However, this has meant that an illegal satellite company called BOutQ was set up and illegally broadcast Premier League football and other sports. The crux of the matter, and what the World Trade Organization have been looking into, is that a link between the Saudi government and BOutQ could not be firmly established. Now, before the WTO report was even released, we had a morning and afternoon today of speculation across all forms of social media. Claims about what was going to be in the report were leaked throughout the time of pre-publication this morning, with a variety of things being reported. In particular, Ian Dennis of the BBC claimed the WTO report says, should the Premier League approve the Newcastle takeover by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, it would be acting inconsistently with its own decisions. What's actually appeared to happen is that the Qataris themselves have got their own take on it out there first, in order to shape the narrative in a more negative light, before anyone has actually looked at it properly. These journalists have then picked that up and ran with it. As ever in the society we currently live in, there seems to be more value in being first than in being right and accurate. So what does the report actually say? Or perhaps more importantly, what doesn't it say? It does say that there were people providing pirated content within Saudi Arabia. Pretty obvious really. No one is denying that BOutQ existed, it's just a case of who was running it. Possibly the most worrying and damning part of this is that it appears Saudi officials actively stopped beIN Sport trying to stop the pirated operation. However, if we link this back to the Premier League owners and directors test, it's a massive reach to suggest anyone involved in the takeover of the club could fail the owners test based on this point. I mean, where do you even start to look? The Saudis, I'm sure, are smart enough to ensure that whoever was involved in these decisions are not going to even be close to being linked with the Newcastle deal. The Premier League can only apply the test to each individual involved in the deal. But what it doesn't say is probably more interesting. For example, it doesn't say that Saudi Arabia will operate in BOutQ. That, to me, is massive. It doesn't mention that at all. And going back to those premature reports from this morning, it appears that those quotes about the WTO report specifically mentioning the Newcastle takeover and the Premier League are basically a load of rubbish. And actually, if you sort of understood what the World Trade Organization is there for, you'd realise it's not their place to comment on a deal such as the Newcastle takeover. So what does it all mean in conclusion? In short, we've had about a month of people telling us that this was going to be the worst possible thing for Newcastle United's chances of a takeover by the Saudis. However, what we've ended up with is a report that is damning of Saudi Arabia. However, it doesn't mention the takeover specifically, and crucially, it doesn't mention the Saudi PIF, the fund that is looking to actually purchase Newcastle United. It doesn't mention them at all. Now, are there any grey areas? Yeah, of course there are, but are those grey areas enough to stop the Premier League accepting the deal going through? In my opinion, I don't think there's enough in this to stop the Saudis involved in the Newcastle takeover failing the owners and directors test as set out by the Premier League. However, I do think that there'll be more conversations to be had over the coming weeks between the Premier League and the Saudis, and I'm sure that there are areas of the report that the Premier League will want to discuss, but I don't think there's anything in there that will be fatal to the deal. As ever with this, it appears that the bad news we've had about this report coming out over the last month has been whipped up by the media, and is another example of why not to get carried away with bad news printed by the media as well as the good news printed by the media. There's no point getting carried away with either of those things. The information is out there for people to read and make their own informed opinions without the need of sensationalist tabloids dictating how we feel about a story. My own personal feeling on this is that I remain more confident that the takeover will go through than not. And after researching the WTO for my last video, it became really clear to me quite quickly that the World Trade Organization don't have the powers, and it's not their role to inform organisations like the Premier League. The World Trade Organization is there to ensure that anything to do with trade, any problem to do with trade is dealt with, and if something is wrong, that the person or the country doing the wrong thing has the opportunity to put it right. In this case, it appears to me that the Saudis will need to do some work on piracy within the kingdom, and if they want this Newcastle United takeover to happen, I'm sure they will find a way to cooperate with the Premier League and the World Trade Organization. I stand by my thoughts from earlier in the week where I believe that this takeover will have a few more weeks left to run on it yet. I'm sure there'll be loads of people out there who have a more negative take on this, but just looking at it from as neutral a viewpoint as I possibly can, it just appears that this report isn't as worrying as we all thought it was going to be. Hopefully soon we will be able to crack open those cans. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and hit the like button too, and I will see you really soon for another video.